Great. So glad to see everyone trickling in. I expect we will still have a few more late arrivals, but we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Sarah Danley. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Farm to Plate Network Manager. So I work at VSJF as part of the Farm to Plate team. So I'm your VSJF staff person for this breakout session. It also happens to be a project I'm involved with, so I will jump in a little bit during the discussion, but I am your VSJF Farm to Plate team host. So with that said, I am entering in the chat some of our guidelines for breakout session conversations. Pretty straightforward, be respectful. With larger groups like this, we'll use the raise hand function or type a question to the chat. When we break into smaller breakout rooms, we don't have to do the raise hand function. We can just have a smaller conversation. And with that, I will introduce Fran Miller, who is the facilitator of this session. So Fran is an attorney at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at Vermont Law School. And take it away, Fran.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and welcome everybody. On behalf of my co-panelists, I welcome you to our session on land access collaborations. I'm Fran Miller, and as Sarah said, I'm a staff attorney at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at Vermont Law School. I'm really happy to be here and talking with you all about alternative models of land ownership and access, and specifically doing a deep dive into the project that we've begun, the White River Land Collaborative. So first, I just want to set the stage for the workshop. I'm going to do a quick introduction to CAFS. We're going to, as I said, do a deep dive into the White River Land Collaborative. We're going to do a bit of Q&A, and then we're going to break up into some breakout rooms. We really want this workshop to be participatory and hear from you all. We are not experts, and we all, everybody in this room has things to add to this conversation, and we're really eager to hear your thoughts. So, quick intro of CAFS. We train law and policy students in food and ag policy by teaching classes in the field. Experience is really important to us, and we partner with organizations to develop free legal resources for policymakers and farmers, consumers, and other stakeholders in the food system. And our students can get legal and master's degrees in food and ag policy. They work in our legal clinic with our partner organizations doing research and advocacy. To give you a quick sense of the breadth of what we work on that might be relevant to you all, we created the Farmland Access Legal Toolkit to help farmers and landowners affordably access, transfer, and conserve land. It includes innovative tools like a web-based farm lease builder that help make legal processes more approachable, and they save farmers and landowners time and money on legal fees. Through the Extension Legal Services Initiative, that's the box on the left at the top, we're creating resources for food producers that answer legal questions that could arise in the course of operations. We've developed a series of fact sheets on FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, for example. The Farmers Market Legal Toolkit we've developed in collaboration with the National Farmers Market Coalition, and this includes legal resources, best practice recommendations, case studies for farmers market leaders. And then finally, many of you might know that CAFS is home to the Vermont Legal Food Hub, which connects farmers and food businesses with skilled attorneys willing to provide pro bono legal services. And this program was started by the Conservation Law Foundation in 2014, and it's since spread throughout New England. So to the subject at hand, today we're focusing on land access, and in particular ways to make land more accessible by creating more ways for farmers and communities to collaborate in accessing land. And I've been working on this issue as part of my work to expand this toolkit that you see, the Farmland Access Legal Toolkit, which is at farmlandaccess.org. I was also the lead author on the Farm to Plate brief titled Alternative Models of Land Access and Ownership, which I wrote with Jim Hafner and Mike Gia of Land for Good, Allison Neihart, and Graham from rural Vermont.
Fran, sorry to jump in, Fran. Your audio is a little scratchy. You might be moving things around in front of your microphone. So just make sure if you can make sure it's a little clear. I think we can hear everything you're saying, but there are periods of scratchiness.
Okay.
Or it getting quieter for a second.
Okay. I have no idea where the mic is, but I will try.
It's probably right at the front of the base of your laptop.
Okay. So on the Fault site, we have a section on collaborative farming. It does talk about the ways that people can both informally and formally farm collaboratively and the legal issues that come up there. Today, we're really focusing more on ownership models that involve collaboration, where more than one farmer or family owns the land that is being farmed. So here's a picture of our beautiful farm that is the basis at the moment for the White River Land Collaborative. This is our first project. And I'm just going to be on my soapbox for a minute here, so bear with me. There's just so many reasons that our country needs to be doing more to support smallholder farmers who are farming regeneratively, using ecological practices, growing food and animals to feed our communities at an affordable price. This is a public good, and it should be treated as such, but that is not public policy right now. So we have to try some new things to support these farmers to be able to feed us, steward the land, combat climate change, and make a living. In addition, as you all know, in Vermont and in other places around the country, the dairy industry has been hit so hard, and landholding dairies tend to be large parcels with a lot of infrastructure. How do we create models of land ownership so that if they wish, dairy farmers can sell their land to other types of farmers for a price that compensates them for their investments? Can we create models so that multiple agricultural enterprises, working lands enterprises, can operate on a single parcel in a collaborative and equitable way? And then last but not least, how do we as a state with a large majority of white people living on unceded Abenaki territory act on our core values and redress past injustices stemming from racism and land theft? So to address these and other issues, we've created the White River Land Collaborative in Tunbridge. It builds off previous community land trust models that have been created to hold agricultural land in a commons to be managed by local community. And we see this as a project that's hopeful in a time of a lot of despair. Here with me to talk about this is Sarah Danley, as you all know her, and Shona Sanford Long of Flying Dog Farm. And before we dive in to the Land Collaborative and all that we're doing, I just want to give credit to those who came before and created these innovative models. And then Sarah's going to talk a little about the genesis of this project. So just real briefly, this model of community land trusts holding agricultural land really began during the civil rights movement. And I urge people to look these up. In 1967, I'm going to really point this one out, the New Communities Land Trust in Albany, Georgia was just groundbreaking. Organized by Shirley and Charles Sherrod and others, they created 5,700 acre farm that included residences, farms, businesses, schools, and it was in a community land trust. Fannie Lou Hamer did amazing things also, farming collaboratively. And then much more recently, the Agrarian Trust launched 10 agrarian commons across the US using this community land trust holding agricultural land model. And I urge you to look at all of these examples. Sarah.
Hey, everyone. So as I alluded to at the beginning, I am excited about this project and involved in it from a farm to plate perspective, but I mostly am involved in this work as a member of the community in which I live. So I live in Royalton. I live 2 miles up the road from Tunbridge, which, as Fran mentioned, is the site of the White River Land Collaborative. And it's as a Royalton resident that I ended up becoming involved in this work. Back in 2016, not to get into too much detail, but in 2016, the 4 towns of Royalton, Sharon, Stratford, and Tunbridge were faced with a developer buying up vast amounts of forested and farmland for a really out of scale development that was looking at putting 20,000 to 40,000 people in a wooded hilltop in this community with a grand total of about 8,000 residents. There was a community reaction to it, which I won't get into, and ultimately the developer withdrew the proposal, but those conversations spurred a community conversation, which I think is even more important, about what do we want to see for our community future? How do we want to use our land base? What is the appropriate balance of creating housing to allow for new residents and for good quality of life, but also preserving our working landscape? So the 4 towns together asked the Vermont Council on Rural Development to do one of their community visit processes. So this is a program that VCRD runs across the state, and they come in and facilitate a community engagement process, usually in a single town. And this time they did it with all 4 towns at the same time. So this is what's shown on the screen. This led to the 4-town action plan from that community visit process. That process led to 3 different priorities that the community selected. They were economic development, housing, and one called preserving the working landscape and creating an ag network. So that we sort of had the public backing for the importance of this issue to the community. And Shona was actually selected as one of the first co-chairs of that conserving the working landscape and building an ag network working group. I'm happy to answer more questions about how it relates to the White River Land Collaborative if they come up, but for now, I'll just say that as someone with 1 foot in the statewide nonprofit food system development world and 1 foot in this community organizing, one of the things that excites me most about this project is that all of those pieces are coming together. I know a lot of nonprofits, Farm to Plate Network members are thinking about how can we do things like alternate models of farmland access, but we can't just point at a map of Vermont and pick a random community and decide to do it there. It has to be something that that community actually wants and is leading the work on. So I'm really excited that this is an opportunity to do that in a community-driven way, and especially in a farmer-led way. Shona and her mom, Suzanne Long, are really the inspiration, founders, and leaders of this project. And with that, is Shona introducing herself next?
Yes.
Hand it over to Shona.
Thanks, Sarah and Fran. Hi, everyone. Let me know if I get a little scratchy or if I freeze, and I'll turn off the video. I don't know how my internet will work here, but so actually, if you any of you who were at the 2019 Farm to Plate gathering, I was on a panel there, and at that point had been working with my family in Vermont on their farm for a couple of years and had just made the decision to move back out of state with my husband for a variety of reasons. I was presenting at that panel and started crying for a bunch of reasons related to that whole decision and process. And over that winter, some things changed and I was able to stay here and actually ended up buying the livestock that my parents had been raising on their farm up until then. So I bought their beef cows and pigs and some sheep they had started raising, and started my own farm, Flying Dog Farm. And for that first year, I was managing my livestock mostly based on their land. But they have a very small farm, a very small land base, which wasn't enough for what I needed to make my livestock business economically viable. So I had been thinking about looking for more land as a young farmer, starting my first farm with very few financial resources. I didn't feel yet ready. I didn't think I was in a position yet to buy any land. So I wasn't really actively looking, but I knew I would need to soon. And last fall, we found out that this farm in Tunbridge, former dairy farm, was up for sale. It was actually owned by friends of my family, who are a relatively young couple, who had decided they needed to sell the farm because it wasn't working economically for them. So it was a pretty difficult thing to happen in this community, but we decided to look at the farm because of the proximity to my parents, and because of the quality of the prime ag land here. We decided to look at the farm and see if it was even a potential. And Fran, do you want to, actually don't know what the next slide is. So here's just a few images of the farm. I might have you switch back and forth a couple times, Fran. So it's a 200-acre property total, which in the scheme of things isn't a huge property, but around here is a pretty significant amount of land. These are some photos of the pastures. This is actually from this year with my cows grazing on them. There's about 50 acres of pasture. This is prime ag land, and so there's soils of prime quality and soils of statewide importance. But the other thing about this property, Fran, if you want to switch to the next slide, as Fran mentioned, there's very significant dairy infrastructure. These big, beautiful, historic barns are a really important part of this community. They're kind of central. This is right on 110, right in the valley of Tunbridge. And these buildings, are both a tourist attraction and also of significance to the community and families here. The Howe family that are the ones that originally built these barns. But they are not set up for what I needed for livestock. There's a lot of work to maintain and restore them, and there was no way that I was going to be able to afford to do that. And so because we had been involved in some of these 4 towns committee work and community needs envisioning processes, my mom and I started to think about, is there potential here to do more than just buying the land and trying to buy the land, pay a mortgage, and make the farming side of things work and pay it off that way. And so we started talking to Fran and Sarah to see, is there interest? Could we use these buildings as a community resource? And is there more opportunities to do more with the land? Because there's also 140 acres of mostly forested land, which again, isn't so well suited to what I would be doing for ag, but has a lot of potential for other uses in the community. Just to point out really quickly, in the bottom left corner here, you can see the inside of this big, beautiful hayloft. These barns were built in 1914, and they are still in really good condition. And this is a building that we envision seeing as a community event and gathering space. And we're just now starting a process of engineering assessment and assessing all the needs and potential for that space. And then Fran, if you want to go to the next slide. This is just a map of the property. So you can see that what's outlined in yellow actually was conserved by Vermont Land Trust prior to the purchase of this property by us, or by Vermont Land Trust. I'll let you talk a little bit more about that, Fran. And that's where there's the prime ag land, the pasture, the farmstead complex, and is right on, it has frontage on the first branch of the White River. And then the part of the property that's outlined in orange is the mostly wooded area, 140 acres, not conserved, but south facing, there's potential for some pasture renovation, there's potential for agroforestry work, solar, which Fran, maybe I'll let you talk a little bit more about, maple sugaring, there's trails, So there's really potential for so many things on this property, but there's no way, or it would be very difficult for one farm or one farm family to manage it all and finance it. And so that's, I think, what the real value is of this project, is having a group that can raise the funds and provide the support, and also find the people to make use of the land in different ways and working together. Do you want to go to the next?
Yeah. Anything more, Shona? Should I move on to this?
I think if you want to move on, and we can always go into more details on different pieces later.
Okay. So to just talk a little bit about current ownership and structure and leasing, where we are now. As Shona said, VLT already owned a conservation easement on the property, and they ended up purchasing the property using their Farmland Futures Fund, which if Maggie's here, she can talk more about, but they have a particular fund that they use for these kinds of projects. They gave us, the White River Land Collaborative, a 5-year lease with an option to purchase the land within 2 years at the current appraised value, or up to 5 years, we could purchase it, but the land will have to be reappraised. When we started negotiating with the original farm owners and with VLT in February of this year, we had no organization. We literally, Shona had just come to me and Sarah, and we just created the project team. We were just talking to people to form an advisory board. So we went to a local nonprofit that was formed in response to as part of the Four-Town Coalition work that Sarah was talking about earlier, the Alliance for Vermont Communities, and we asked them to fiscally sponsor us so that we could accept donations towards the purchase of the land. They agreed, and that also allowed us to enter into the lease agreement with VLT. And as you can see in the diagram, we lease the property from VLT, and then we sublease it to Shona and her husband. The residents to Shona and her husband and a few other farm workers, and then we lease the farm to Flying Dog Farm. An important point here, Shona, you have something?
No, keep going.
Just one thing I want to mention also, and Shona mentioned solar. We were negotiating with Norwich Solar, which is a local community-oriented solar company, right from the get-go in talking about acquiring this land. And they actually purchased a leasehold option to build a solar array on some of that cleared forested land that Shona mentioned earlier. And this was really significant for us because it enabled us to get the farm owners, the original farm owners, extra dollars beyond what VLT was willing to pay for the land. And that was really important to us, to be able to help them get what they needed to be able to move on in this, kind of sad part of their process where they had to give up the farm. The other thing about the solar and the lease is that assuming this gets built, which it is supposed to be built in the spring, we get 25 years of lease payments of $15,000 a year, which really helps us be self-sustaining.
And we will still be, I will have the option to graze sheep under the solar. We'll still be able to use the land under the solar. So it's a really integrated approach to solar. I think something that was important to us in that agreement was it's not just solar being plopped on the land with a fence around it. Right. It's really looking at integrating it into the land in a part of the property where it's not in the view shed. It's not in the view of the Route 110. It's not in any of our neighbors' views. And it has the benefits of the solar energy, income for the farm, and still being able to use that land. So I think that's kind of a really good example of how we want to manage this project, is finding the best uses for every piece of land possible and integrating them.
Yep. So, as you can hear, I think we're really at the beginning stages here. And our next steps include, over this winter, doing a community engagement process to further determine, we've already started to determine this through the Four-Town Coalition process, but we want to further determine local farmer needs. We're working on the barn and other infrastructure, doing an assessment to help determine what additional possible enterprise uses can go in there. We're developing a plan for the forest, which includes a local young Abenaki forestry student who's leading a project to reintroduce native and culturally important species to the Abenaki. And we're exploring other agroforestry enterprises and trails. Another core value of ours is racial equity, and we're developing a process to ensure equity in soliciting and selecting additional farmer tenant collaborators. And that process we're working on it. Solar build is likely to start in the spring. And a big piece that we're working on now is fundraising to purchase the land from VLT by June of 2023, which is, the land is appraised now at a value of $650,000. That will be the purchase price if we can do it by June.
This is me just really quickly jumping in to sort of connect some of the dots. So for those of you who are at this morning's session about the new network structure and how the heartbeat of our new network structure is focused around priority strategies from the plan, one of those groups that we've tentatively identified as launching right away is a priority strategy team on priority strategy number 9, around expanding funding for programs dedicated to farmland access and leveraging that funding to increase access through flexible and innovative models. I won't read the full text of the strategy on the screen, but you can skim it or check that out in the plan itself. So just to quickly connect the dots and say that we will be having a priority strategy team around work that closely relates to this project.
So this slide just kind of goes through, this really is our core values, but it also is what we're doing. And I won't read it all, but we are reducing barriers to land access for underserved farmers. We're fostering support for ecological stewardship. We are really excited about the project with the forestry student and working with local Abenaki land stewards. As Shona said, we're working hard to integrate solar into the working landscape in a way that is best land use. The legal model that we're trying to work on here is to permanently take this land off the speculative real estate market, which we feel is so important in these times. And we want to be an inspiration for more of these types of projects, both in Vermont and beyond. So key to our success is the local community has been really supportive of this work, and we will continue to organize that support and foster it. This was at Open Farm Week. We had a really lovely event, over 100 people in our community. So before I wrap up, I just want to talk about, get in the weeds a little bit about the legal structures that we're looking at. So we are hopeful that our fiscal sponsor will agree to be a parent organization, which, as you can see in this diagram, is a 501c3 nonprofit. So it would be a parent organization to a newly created land trust or land holding entity, as this diagram calls it, which would hold the land and manage the agricultural operations, while the fiscal sponsor could manage the charitable or educational opportunities on the farm. So you can see here that what the land holding entity does is really everything related to the land. Manage leases, collect rents, buy the land, talk with the community. In this kind of structure, 501c2s collect revenue and pay expenses, and any extra dollars that are left at the end go up to the C3. So the C3, which is tax exempt, does not have to pay any taxes on any income. And I'm happy to talk more about this in Q&A or in the breakout rooms. And this is, we're not decided on this. This is a model that Agrarian Trust has been using. And I just think it's really interesting and might fit what we want to do, our vision here. So that is us. That's our project team. And what we wanted to do now, what time is it? 1:45. So we have a bunch of time. We wanted to do a little bit of Q&A. Let you all please talk to us. I'm going to stop sharing this for a minute so I can see. So I can see a bunch of names. So we'll do some Q&A maybe for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or so.
I'll jump in.
People have to say, and then we'll go into a few breakout rooms and talk amongst ourselves, and then we'll come back and do some final reflections. And I'll give more instructions when we do the breakout, but let's talk to us. What do you all think? Questions? I guess you could raise your hands or you could just unmute.
This is Regina Beidler. I'll just say that I'm a fan of what you're working to accomplish. I think this is a great model, and I always felt lucky to have conversations with some of you as we were looking to transition our farm as well and to look at this model. So that was great. I'm just curious, Shona, what you anticipate both as, I think communities find farms very interesting to observe and to be a part of, especially if there's elements that they can visually see. So I'm kind of curious what you hope are the opportunities in your interactions with the local community, and what the challenges might be too for people to have greater access to a farm property than perhaps most of us have as farmers.
Yeah, thanks, Regina. That's a good question. It is interesting, even right now, I think, both the location of this farm is very, it's right on 110. There's always, just people driving by and seeing what's going on is very different than other farms that I've worked that have been less visible. Whether that's people from out of state or neighbors. It's kind of nice because I also have neighbors checking in on me or, asking how things are going. So that's one aspect of it, just the location. I think there is interest in the project. And I think as people hear more about the project and think of it as a community farm and community land, there have been times already where people are wanting to come visit or, just come onto the farm, and we're not quite ready for that yet. And I think that's something we're still trying to figure out, is how do we balance that, that parts of the farm being open to the public, or certain times when the farm is open to the public, but also making sure that we're not just having people wander around, especially with livestock and electric fences, without some sort of guidance and supervision, and making sure that there aren't any issues with it. So I think that's something we're very much still in the early stages of figuring out. I think we've had a couple of people come by before, and it's all very much just, just people wanting to know what's going on. There's no bad intentions, but it's definitely something that we're working to figure out, that balance of, restricted access to certain parts of the farm. We haven't done, figuring out things like signage. I think we're in the very early stages of that. So I don't have a really good answer yet, but I think that's an important thing to bring up. How do you mix the working farm with public access? And even thinking about things like there's times when I'm castrating piglets, or there's things happening on the farm that might be a little shocking to visitors that aren't used to it. So how do we also, create awareness about that and have that, have that as part of everything that's happening.
It's a great answer, Shona.
Thanks.
Thanks, Shona. Megan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks so much. You know, I'm curious about building equity on this property and inviting folks onto the property. I'm curious about how that outreach happens and also how decisions are being made. I guess, and I'll go on mute. Thank you.
Sarah, you want me to start? Megan, you mean building equity, financial equity, or you mean building equity, racial equity? I wasn't sure.
That's a good follow-up. No, I mean building equitable land access in terms of racial equity.
Gotcha. So we are just starting to struggle with this question. And in particular around how do we choose, how do we solicit other ag enterprises on the property? And we both want to do, we're doing community outreach to find out local farmer needs, but we also want to specifically reach out to the BIPOC community in Vermont and see if people want to participate here. And we're acutely aware of being a white-led organization. And how do we do that in a way that's not tokenizing, that's real? We've done a bit of outreach, and probably our next move is to reach out to Relief and invite participation and ask how to do this in a way that is respectful and real. So on the racial equity front, that's our plan. And, you know, and it's also the case, of course, we're in Vermont, unceded Abenaki territory, and we have on our advisory board the young forestry student that I was mentioning, who is a local Abenaki land steward. And we have gotten a grant, couple of grants for her to lead a project, which maybe Sarah, you could talk a little bit more about. And that's another way that we feel really strongly that we want to grant access, and not just access, but leadership role in how this land gets stewarded.
Yeah, the only thing I would add specifically to the forest planning project is that it is really important to us to do that work first. You know, like the broader four-town community is really excited about trails and public access, and that's an important part of our vision, but we're resisting the pressure to jump straight into that, because it's really important to us to let Emily and other members of the Abenaki community weigh in first before we jump into other community access planning. So we've been trying to put the brakes on some of the other stuff to give Emily this winter and summer to do that work. And as Fran mentioned, we did get 2 grants, one of them from the High Meadows Fund, who are in the room, so thank you. And the other one from the Open Space Institute, which is a national nonprofit. So we're really excited to have Emily doing that work this winter. I think unless Shona also wanted to weigh in on that question, we can go to Eric next.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So I've mentioned this question to some of the panelists before, but in this forum, I think it might be helpful to hear a little bit about how this particular project is unique among similar kinds of land access models, and then also a little bit of a sense of the landscape of the broader picture of land access models. You mentioned kind of benchmarking agrarian trust and agrarian commons. And so sort of a little bit of compare and contrast, and also some of the things that are innovative about this particular project.
Mm-hmm. Personally, I don't know other people who are doing this in Vermont. There might be, that's partly why we're presenting, and other people on this call might know other projects that are related, our sisters, are, you know, I know that there's other collaborative projects happening. I just don't know them intimately, so I'm not sure how it compares. And Sarah, you might have more to say about that.
Yeah, and I can ask the question differently as needed. Sarah, did you want to jump in?
What I would say, and this, I don't know, Eric, you might feel like this is sidestepping your question, but my initial reaction is that it's unique And it has to be because there's no two situations or two communities that are exactly alike. So in doing this work, I think there is no one size fits all. It really does have to be tailored to the community. And I say community in terms of the land base, the specific property, the markets, the agricultural markets that are present in that area, and what the rest of the community, farmers and otherwise, is interested in supporting. So I think it's unique because all innovative land access and creative land access and collaborative models have to be unique for each community. So when we say we want to be, or at least speaking for myself, when I say we want this project to be a model for other communities, we don't necessarily mean taking our exact legal structure or even our exact stakeholder process and applying it somewhere else that might be different, but rather like, what are those things about the process of finding out what is right for the community that can be applied elsewhere?
Mhm.
I think one thing, just thinking about some different models, one thing that's been important to us from the beginning is that, it is very much farmer led, and it's not like an incubator program. Like I think a lot of land access programs are more incubator or split up to different, kind of split up different parcels of land. And, this farmer manages this piece and that farmer manages this other piece. I think we're trying to both make it a, long-term farmers have stability. Any farmer or land steward that's here can be managing land here as long as they need and want to be. Some may move on at some point. And that they are really involved in leading the process. I think, there's a lot of land access programs that are led, that farmers are more tenants. And I think that's a very different process. It can be a very different organization structure and process. And it, it's different.
Just I see in the chat, people are talking about Bread and Butter and Vermont Agrarian Commons. Bread and Butter is exploring whether the Vermont Agrarian Commons is the best way for it to go. There's other conversations with VLT and some of their other partners. So I'm not positive that's moving forward. But Vermont Agrarian Commons does exist, and Allison and I are both on the board. And we are exploring whether it's Bread and Butter or another project that becomes the Vermont Agrarian Commons. And I can talk more about that if people want.
So we have Andrew May for the next question. Then I have Andy Wood and Willow B. Carlo. And I think after that, we'll want to, we can check the time, especially if they're short questions, but we might want to move to breakout rooms after that. So Andrew, go for it.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I was hoping to backtrack a little bit toward the equity piece, and actually am interested in the financial equity side. I guess I'm just curious. I was trying to formulate this question better in my head, and I was having a hard time doing that. But I'm curious about the balancing act that I'm sure is happening between being a financially solvent, structure as an organization, but then as a farmer building equity for your future, Shona, and what that would mean. I guess it's pretty broad, and I could go more specific if you'd like, but that's just what I'm thinking. Thanks.
Fran, do you want to start just about the kind of again, we're very in the early stages. I think Fran has some thoughts about this just from agrarian trust models. And it's still something we have a lot to figure out. And then I can talk a little bit just about some of my thoughts on that. Yeah.
I mean, one of the reasons that agrarian trust anyway is doing it the way they're doing it, the C3, C2 model, is that it also allows for the C2 to reinvest in the land and in the farm and in the farmers. And so, again, we're just so at the beginning of this, and we really hope to be self-sustaining and not have to rely on a lot of outside income. And with the solar and with leases, equitable leases, meaning not extractive, We think we can do that. We're working on being able to do that. So there isn't any need really to build equity for the nonprofit owner of the land. The question is, I think the more significant question maybe, Andy, is, how does Shona and the other ag enterprises on the land, without owning the land and the land increasing in value so that they have that as retirement, how do they build equity? And I think that with the agrarian trust, and Shona, please, say how you're thinking about this. If the farmers don't have to pay all the money for rent or a high debt burden, they can invest money how they wish in equipment or in IRAs or in other investment vehicles that are not land.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing for me, is thinking about it in it's a little different way. You're not necessarily building equity in the land that you would have to potentially sell at some point, but that's also, equity that you, at least in some ways that I see it, that's only financial, that only comes down to cash if you end up selling the land. So I think having the lower costs of having lease, low cost lease. And I think something important to say actually about that is, like, right now for this first year, my lease has been free as we get everything set up and as I get my farm established. And one of the things that we're looking at is matching the lease payments of any tenants to both what they can afford to pay as they start up, and then, that might increase over times, and matching it to what they're actually using. So I think that's an important piece of just giving farmers the opportunity to invest, like as Fran said, in equipment, in livestock, in parts of their business that are going to be producing income more rapidly than land would. I think we do need to talk a little bit about, there's things like buildings. If a farmer is improving in buildings, what does that look like when a farmer decides to stop leasing? They would be getting some sort of payment back for what they've invested in those buildings. That I think that's a pretty common model, potentially for other equipment and investments. I think that's a pretty common and a straightforward thing. There might be some more creative different things that we could look at as well. Even things like looking at what would a payment structure look like for investments in land quality improvements over time. Would the White River Land Collaborative be paying a farmer at the end of whatever their lease term is some amount for the improvements to productivity of the land that they have made? I think that might be a creative way to look at building equity in a little bit different way.
Great. So Willoughby, why don't we go to you? And then after that, I think we should head to breakout rooms. So Willoughby, we'll do your question and the answer, whoever that is. And then Fran, after that, you can give any discussion prompts.
Yeah, I just hopefully have a short question and anyone can answer it. And perhaps the answer is no. But I'm just curious if you guys have received any resistance to this model of land ownership, given that it's a commons model and sort of what I think is an inherent anti-capitalist structure to a commons model. So yeah, whether that's like, if you've felt that from your community or from a wider community, that's my question.
I love that question. I think it's really important. And I think the answer to it comes from how organically this project grew out of the community, and the fact that Shona, who grew up in the community, and people are really familiar with Shona and her mom, Suzanne Long from Luna Blue. People have been incredibly supportive of the project. And I think it's because it's so of the community. It allows us to bring in this anti-capitalist model without people having big reactions to that it's anti-capitalist.
And I think, some of it is, it's like, it takes a while to explain to people what the model really is. And, right now it's mostly me on the land. So it's maybe doesn't, for a lot of people, we've kind of had to explain, oh, no, it's not Shona's farm. It's not, she's farming this land, but there's a much bigger processing community around this farm. So I think as part of it, explaining exactly what we're doing and how we're going about it will also take time. But I think, yeah, so far everyone has been in the community, has been really supportive, and I think excited about this model. I think, yeah, as as a potentially different way to think about land and farming.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Anything to add, Sarah?
No, I think yeah, go ahead and share the prompts and then we can head into breakouts.
Okay. So I put the questions in the chat rather than having to deal with sharing my screen again. So we want people to, we're going to do these breakout rooms. We would like for you to talk about what are you working on relating to this issue? Why did this session interest you? And are there other core values or visions that we should address by these models? And if somebody in your group could take notes and save them and send them to us, Sarah, you can say how people should do that. We'd love them. We are going to come back at the end.
So the session goes until 2:45 and we want 10 minutes to share reflections and wrap up. So we'll be coming back at 2:35, which gives us just under 30 minutes.
Yeah. Maybe we could just come back at 2:30 and spend 15 minutes together.
Yeah.
Do you want me to break it into about 5 rooms? That'll give you about 8 people per room.
That works.
Yeah,
That works.
that's
Okay.
great.
And then I'm going to do this so that it just automatically moves people. And I can set this to automatically do like 28 minutes. And there'll be a 60-second countdown to let you know when it's going to close. I'm good?
Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you.
Okay, and then this should start moving people.
Hi, I'm coming on, but I'm noticing that my colleague is joining. So I'm hoping it's not just the 3 of us because we're coming from a similar place of curiosity.
So
we both work in the same location or the same organization, which is the High Meadows Fund.
okay. So are you trying to get into breakout rooms?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Somehow I got kicked off the Zoom.
Me too.
Oh, interesting. Do you want to be in the same place?
No, I think it would be better for us.
Different places? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm
I see them all the
assigning one of you to
time.
room 1
Thank you.
and one of you. Okay, so you should
Okay.
be sent in a second.
Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome. There seems to be a little lag. Welcome back, everyone. Looks like they have about 20 seconds until everyone will be kicked out of their breakouts and will join us.
All right.
All right, Fran, I think we're all back. Want to take it away?
Yep. Oh, that was such a lovely conversation. I hope you all had great conversations. So I thought what we could do, we have about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more. Just take a couple of minutes per group and do a little bit of report out on some of the themes, some of what you think would be good to share with the whole group. And Andy, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to start with you just because you were in my group. And so I'm going to call on you, and then other people should just speak up.
I'm okay with that. Let's see. So the session interested our group because I think, like many people at this entire conference, we have heard about land access as a persistent topic of discussion and an issue in agricultural communities around the state. And most of us expressed just a general interest in larger cooperative models and the appeal that those had. In terms of core values and visions that should be addressed by the models, we discussed how do we value what the farmer is putting into farming for animals, regeneration, soil improvements, etc. Folks have seen what it takes for a newer young farmer to build their business and all that they're giving to the land. So how can they build wealth for their future and live decently without the investment being in the land? And we talked about how that this investment in the land or in other areas, one of the critical parts being that another young, new beginning farmer who is interested in farming is the crucial next step towards land being made available. There needs to be folks to farm it. So kind of a segue into other thoughts.
Thank you, Andy. Anyone else?
This is Allison Nyhart. I can talk about our group. So we had a group of folks that were mostly interested from a personal perspective as opposed to professionally being involved right now. But a couple of us who are interested in potentially being engaged in this type of project in the future. We were also lucky enough to have Shona in our breakout group, so we got to pepper her with some more questions. One vision of values question that Ollie raised was a kind of fundamental question about land ownership in general. And, given the history of the land in Vermont, who actually has the right to own land here? Then we had, a bit of conversation with Shona about some of the daunting and also joyful parts of the project so far. In terms of fundraising, it sounds like having people like Fran and Sarah involved in the support that you all are providing has been really valuable as Shona has been focusing more on the day-to-day farming of it. We also had a great conversation about how communities can be prepared when a particular piece of property comes on the market. And Shona expressed that in this case, it did feel like there was time pressure because the farmers wanted to sell ASAP, and that there was market pressure from incoming, people coming to Vermont to buy properties. And that the role of the Vermont Land Trust was really critical in being able to move on the financing piece in a really time-sensitive way before, the folks who want to eventually have it in a community ownership model are able to necessarily move on something. And so Ollie suggested that having a revolving fund specifically for that purpose could be a really great thing for the Land Trust to consider, because these types of collaborative community projects often take more time and require a fundraising effort, and that having a little bit of those things already in place beforehand can facilitate moving on an opportunity when it arises, because we know those we don't always have advance notice. So those were some highlights from our group.
I love that. Thank you. Another group?
I can share out a little from group 1. So we didn't super closely follow the questions. We just kind of had a really nice, wonderful chat. But we talked a lot and at length about equity and the connection between racial and social equity, as well as financial equity, especially long term. And towards the end of the conversation, we were specifically thinking about like what, a lot of farmers rely on their land for retirement, and aren't necessarily able to build up retirement funds during their business, and that security is tied up in owning land, and how will this model moving forward provide stability and safety? And I can't remember the person's name in our group that so wonderfully brought that up and said it so well. Let me look around for the names. Okay, I'm not sure if you're on, but
when I was talking about like
Shelby, hi.
About other ways that we can maybe define security outside of land and equity. And I think that's going to be a critical piece to really like fleshing out models like this for people.
Yeah, thanks, Shelby. And Kate from our group brought up really well that we are at this like kind of key transition point for both like physical pieces of land that are transferring ownership, and as well as kind of like a way of thinking about land, and a transition from thinking about sole ownership of land to more collective ownership of property. And how do we get farmers what they've invested in, but also change our systems so the next generation of farmers and of people living in communities don't necessarily have to operate under that. So if anybody else in my group 1 wants to chime in, feel free. But that was some of my notes.
So I'm going to jump in. I hate cutting off this wonderful conversation. We are at time, so I want to give brief next steps, but then the next thing is a 15-minute break. So the room could stay open for a little bit if people want to follow up with one-on-one questions or keep chatting. So the next thing on the agenda is the next set of breakout sessions, which starts at 3 o'clock sharp. So again, you'll find those links in your agenda PDF or on the Farm to Plate website, depending on which ones you signed up for or want to attend. And other than that, I believe the main Zoom room is open if you want to go back to the main room and chat with people. Or I think we can hold this room open a little bit longer as well, or you can just take a break from the computer screen. Thanks so much, everyone.
Just one final thing I'm putting in the chat. If you want to stay updated on the project and get on our mailing list, just email whiteriverlandcollaborative.com. Is that right? At gmail.com. That's the website, but the email is at gmail.com, and we can put you on the mailing list. And we don't send out that many things because we're all volunteer and it takes a long time, but it's a way to keep updated on the project. And just also to say, I know we have to end, Sarah, but these are such great conversations and we need to keep having them, and let's. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
And Victoria, I think we can stop the recording.
Great, I'm gonna go ahead and close the room.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, thank you.